Latvia's declaration of restoration of independence in 1990 was carefully articulated around the illegality of the Soviet invasion of Latvia in 1940 and the forcible annexation of Latvia into the USSR in 1944. It took a little over a year after that declaration for Latvia to obtain its full independence in August 1991. And that was 4 months before the collapse of the Soviet Union, which is important to mention. Latvia has been a stable democracy since. It has joined NATO and the EU in 2004. And so my question is, what role, if any, do you think that the peaceful transition articulated around legal principles and historical arguments has played in setting Latvia into its course, Latvia and your Baltic neighbors, onto that course? And I'm thinking, of course, of your other neighbors like Ukraine and Belarus, who haven't been successful in that way.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the University of Michigan and you, Professor Halberstam, and you, Professor Zabrzezinski, for this meeting and organizing of this event. I remember very well our first visit 4 years ago with the European Court of Justice, and you organized a very interesting discussion about European law. And so, University of Michigan, we have also, you asked me about the restoration of the independence, but I would like to mention also the establishing step of the Latvian state, 1918. And next year we will celebrate the 100 years anniversary of the establishing of diplomatic relations between the United States and Latvia. And the first ambassador of US to Latvia, Frederick Coleman, was born in Detroit and has obtained his law degree here by you at the University of Michigan. So that at least University of Michigan and Latvia has already 100 years history of relations. But concerning the restoration of the independence, it's one of the rare cases that an independent state survives occupation and then the independence is restored. But it is not unique. During the Second World War, Germany occupied, for example, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Denmark, Norway, Yugoslavia, and other, Poland. Yeah, Poland, a part of Poland, the biggest part, and so on. And those states were restored 1944 or 1945, also for a short time after the occupation, 4 or 5 or 6 years, for example, in case of Austria, in case of Czechoslovakia. By Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, it lasted longer, 50 years. Not 5 years, but 50 years. But anyway, the situation was analogous. After an illegal occupation, a restoration of the statehood, a restoration of the independence. And the Baltic states, Baltic independence and democracy movements were very important, not only in respect in regard to the restoration of independence, but also in the changing of the European political map. Because we should remember that the Baltic independent movements were, after Gorbachev started his slow reforms, were always organized forces, political forces, which demanded more and more and more. And during the 4 or 5 years of Gorbachev reforms, Moscow was always in a defense position. They should, and then they give more and more, gave more and more freedoms. And at the end, we restored independence. And after that, Soviet Union break down. And therefore, it is false to say that we restored the independence as a result of the breakup of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union broke up as a result of the independent movements of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And it was also a challenge for the other bloc states, Poland under communist regime and Czechoslovakia and on, also to encourage the independent, the democratic movements. And the Berlin Wall was followed the so-called Baltic Way, the chain of 2 million people, which was very important event of the day, a political event, and this encouraged also Eastern Germany to, or the Eastern German opposition, more precisely, to go forward with the reforms. So I think the Baltic independent movements were important, of course, for us to restore, this was the first goal, of course, to restore democracy and independence, but the repercussions were, so to say, immense also for Europe and also for the world. Also, that leads also to the end of the Cold War.
Thank you. I want to stay on, I mean, that's very important to see because people always think that it starts basically with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Poles are very annoyed at that because they argue that it starts with the round table of June and the first elections. So it's interesting, it's important to know that other countries in the region were very important in actually breaking away from communism and making that move toward democracy in their own ways that contributed to that big transition of 1989 and then 1992. So thank you for bringing some precisions on this. Another question I have is actually is related to the current situation in the region. And since Latvia share borders with Lithuania and Estonia, of course, but also with Russia and Belarus, given that Russia thrives on destabilizing its neighbors, and not only its neighbors, how concerned are you by the situation in Belarus? I have in mind here not only the autocratic regime's repression of democratic movements and several dissidents seeking refuge in the Baltic states and in Poland, but also the situation at the border with migrants and refugees that's putting pressure on Belarusian neighbors.
Yes. Latvia is very worried about the situation in Belarus. It's a neighboring country. And we see that there was a falsification of the presidential elections. And the Belarusian people does not want this to accept. And this is a reason of the situation in Belarus. It was absolutely unusual situation that during many months there was a lot of demonstrations against the regime, but of course the regime has all repressive apparatus, police and secret service and so on. So I think that the regime is absolutely discredited in the eyes of the Belarusian society. It is only at the power because of police, secret service, and this cannot last for a very, very long time. So I think that this situation is comparable with situations in other parts of the world where there is a genuine, and this is very important to say, a genuine democratic movement which wants to change autocratic regimes. We have this in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and also before it was also in eastern part of Europe, 89, and the situation is also similar there. But I would also stress that this is a genuine movement. It is not from outside exported to Belarus. And we can see that in Afghanistan maybe it's much more difficult to organize, to establish democracy where the, I would say, historical, traditional, cultural preconditions are not there. But this is not the case in Belarus. So our position is that we politically supporting the demand for new, free and fair elections. Also we are supporting the demands of the opposition. A few days ago I had a speech at the United Nations General Assembly. I said that clearly also that the world community should also politically support the demands, just demands of the democratic opposition.
And the pressures at the border?
Yeah, this is a response of the Lukashenko regime to Europe, because we are members of the European Union and NATO, and there are 3 borders with Latvia, with Lithuania, with Poland. And the Lukashenko regime is organizing, so to say, migrant flows. They are paying so more or less 10,000–15,000 euros for a flight. And they're saying you can go freely to Europe, to Germany especially. And but it's our right and our duty to guard our border, because it's outer border of NATO, it's outer border of the European Union, and it is also supported and accepted by the European Union, because the European Union is supporting us in this position. Because if we this is a kind of we should not be the hostages of the Lukashenko regime. So, and I think after a while, Lukashenko regime will see that this instrument, the instrumentalizing of migrants as a weapon, I would say, is not successful, and therefore our position is common with Lithuania and Poland, and backed by the European Union.
Thank you. Since we're talking about the European Union, I wanted to ask what you see Latvia's role in the EU. I mean, Latvia is a small country. The Baltic states each are small. Together, however, they constitute a significant unit. So what do you see the contribution of Latvia and the Baltic states to the EU?
Yes. The size of Latvia is exact the size of West Virginia. So 24,000 square miles and approximately 2 million inhabitants. So you can see it's not Rhode Island, but it's already West Virginia. Together with Estonia and Lithuania, we have 3 from 27 member states. And in the European Council, each member state has vote, and our position in the European Union is that we are Europe friendly. You know that in some other member states there are 50-50, more Europe, less Europe. It's not the case for Latvia, not the case for Estonia, for Lithuania. All political parties which are represented in the parliament are pro-European. They have differences, they're leftist or rightist or centrist, but European Union or Europe is sort of the common goal and consensus. And therefore, we are contributing to the development of European Union very constructively. We are working together in a so-called format NB8, also that is Scandinavian members of the European Union and Baltic members, 8 countries from already 27, 1/3. and in many important questions, we are looking first to establish our common position so that we can put forward in the Council. So I think we are for development and deepening of the European Union, of the common market, common interests, and also we are for more visible European foreign policy, I would say. There are some questions how to get this, how to organize a common policy which is in the interests and of all European member states, and how to get a consensus. In the most cases, I am speaking now concerning foreign policy, in the most cases there is a principle of unanimity. And in order to have more quick reactions, maybe there is also discussion whether a majority would be enough. So to say that the majority could decide on the foreign political actions. I think we should be carefully in this respect, so that no country should have the feeling that the interests of this country are not considered by the common foreign policy. And therefore, my proposal is so-called no harm principle. So to say, in principle, you can say no, and then the action is stopped. But you should not say no, because maybe you have a deal in another case. You should bring forward a strong motivation why it would be harmful, such a decision which you discussed, for the respective country. It is something between unanimity and majority. And I think I will put forward also this principle, or this idea of this principle in European institutions. I think it would be, then we would have a more effective European foreign policy. But we have already effective, but we can have a more effective European foreign policy.
Also, thanks so much, and welcome again, Mr. President. So just to pick up on the foreign policy point, I was wondering what your views were, I guess, on the current Biden administration's various moves. You might say there could be quite some disappointment among Europeans. Back when Brexit was happening, Trump was saying, well, if the UK leaves Europe, they're going to get in the back of the line. I'm going to talk to them last, and kind of pushing, and Obama was sort of on the sidelines saying the opposite. And also when Trump was not consulting, Obama and Biden would say, we're going to do consultations with everybody. And now you kind of have, one could say, I will say it, I'm not a diplomat, a double betrayal by the Biden administration. Not only are they now not consulting on Afghanistan and on the Australian submarine agreement, but they're also meeting with Boris Johnson in the White House immediately. And so in some sense, it does not quite seem as though either the UK has to get at the back of the line, nor does it seem they're consulting particularly with Europe. So how does that make you feel, or how does that make the European Union feel?
Yes, I think Biden administration is serious about the necessity to have strong allies in Europe. Maybe it was not so visible in the previous 4 years, but now it is clear. And for example, in the speech of President Biden a few days ago in New York by United Nations General Assembly, he repeated many times that the US is together with allies. So, and I think this is a general idea, general principle of the Biden administration in the foreign policy. And then, of course, this is different from the previous administration. And I think this is very good for and important for both, for Europe and for US. Because the situation, the global situation in the world has changed. And we should reflect this change. And now China becomes a global power. I don't know whether this year or next year China would be also economically number one for the United States in the economy. And this is a reality, and the United States should also see that, and also Europe. But United States, or North America, including Canada, I would say, and Europe are based on the same democratic values, and this is very important. When we have few centers of power in the world, then of course the centers of power in Europe and North America is building one big player or one big system, I would say Western system. These are Western values. And therefore we should work together in order to defend the threats for our fundamental beliefs, for democracy, for rule of law. And the situation is different as 10, 20 years ago. Our values are endangered in many ways we can speak about, but it is, I think, Europe sees that, US sees it. And then there are, so to say, daily politics, daily deals, and sometimes they are maybe not so, there could be disagreements, but disagreements under France happens toujours, happens, it's normal. And of course, I can fully understand the disappointment of France, of President Macron, but I see already that they will talk with each other in order to clarify the situation.
Good, thank you. So from the international to the domestic, and they're always connected actually. I'm glad actually that you brought us back to 1918 in your original answer, because when Latvia restored its independence, it did this by a legal move of reestablishing the state as it existed in 1918, and one of the consequences of Latvia doing that was to grant citizenship to everybody who at that time in 1918 was a Latvian citizen. And that had the result of disenfranchising 300,000, I believe at the time, people of Russian descent who had immigrated to Latvia in the intervening period. And to this day, there are still 200,000 such people in Latvia, and they are actually, from an international or from an outsider's perspective, stateless. I realize your Supreme Court had said they're not technically stateless because they have a different non-citizen status, but it is sort of an unusual situation. I was wondering how much progress has been made on that, and how you view that, especially given the international challenges, again, also that you're dealing with Russia, who has a particular interest in this, and that must be quite complicated.
The restoration of independence, it was a full restoration of independence, including the citizenship. We had Latvian citizens, for example, abroad, in Europe, in the US, despite the occupation. And I can remember again the situation in Western Europe during the Second World War. For example, Belgium was occupied, but the Belgian citizenship continues. And after the end of the Belgian occupation, then of course the citizenship became effective. And absolutely the same, it is a consequence, this is a consequence of the restoration, not new establishment of the state. But the Soviet Union forced also the immigration in the Baltic states in order to have, so to say, the social basis for the occupation. But the people who immigrated during the Soviet occupation without consent of their legitimate Latvian government, they have the possibility easily to obtain Latvian citizenship, because it's necessary only to live 5 years in Latvia, and all of them, they're already 30 years, so that they're living this more than 5 years in Latvia, and also to have some knowledge of the Latvian state language. And if you are rising up in or living in a country, of course, in order to be a full citizen, you should know what the society or what the country is saying, what the discourses and so on. And most young people have already Latvian citizenship. They want to be integrated. Some older people don't want, or they are hesitating because they are still hanging on the Soviet idea of Soviet imperium, and they are not regarding Latvia as a legitimate state because Soviet Union should be restored and so on. But this generation is diminishing in natural way. But if a person decides, for example, today to obtain Latvian citizenship, it is completely possible. We are not compelling them.
Can they have dual citizenship?
Yes, we have dual citizenship. It is after the citizenship law reform 2013 with a number of countries, so to say, it's possible to have, including US. It is possible from Latvian side to have double US and Latvian citizenship, and many Latvians, members of the Latvian community, have this citizenship.